you. Good evening, everybody. I noticed that a good percentage of the audience are men. And what I'm about to say now, I hope it will go down reasonably well, because this is not just to talk about life in the Wrens. It's also about how life has changed for women, and how women's lives in the services have changed, and how their role is completely different. I'll have to bore you a bit with how I came to get into the Wrens in the first place. I had to leave school. There was no money to keep me in the sixth form, and my mother decided, she was a single parent and there wasn't much money around, and so she's got me a safe job in the town hall waterworks in Sheffield. And she thought that was great, and the Sheffield Waterworks were very good employers. They sent me to day release at college, and I learnt several skills from them. But the highlights of the day were grown men sitting at a desk arguing whether you should have the window open or closed. My mother remarried, which was good for her, and I thought the time was right that I should move on and be independent. But if you think of 1951, girls of 18 did not club up with other girls of 18 and rent a flat as they do today. No. There was no, you didn't leave home until you got married, so the options were very limited. So I decided to write to cruise liners, because the war was over and the holiday business was started up. And every cruise liner I wrote to said, sorry, you've got to be 25, and we'll only take you if you're a hairdresser or a nanny. Well, at 18, that's a bit, it's a no-go area. So, on my lunch hours from the waterworks, I would go down the road to in Sheffield, and there was a big recruitment office for the Royal Navy. So, having listened to the arguments about whether the window should be open or closed, I thought, right, let's try the Navy recruiting office. So in I went, and yes, they were very glad to have me because I got good school certificate. And so they fill in, what would you like to do? So I looked at the options and thought, don't want to be secretary, that's a writer, because I'm escaping from that. I didn't want to be a meteorologist, I didn't want to be a steward, because that's hard work. And I was left with an aircraft fitter or a radio mechanic. So I had the maths and the science to be a radio mechanic, so that's what I enlisted to do. So the forms came through, you pass your medical, and off I went to Burfield near Reading, where you learn basic skills. Well, when you get to Burfield, you're all girls left home for the first time, you're faced with double bunks and arguing who's going to have the top bunk. And you learn various things there: cleanliness, how to do hospital corners on beds. Then you also had to learn to march. Well, there's always a nice chief or a petty officer with a strong voice teaching you to march. And there's always one who, you would not believe it possible, but we had a girl in our squad who, when her right foot went out, her right arm went out.
I believe it.
Yeah, I believe it.
So you can imagine she was reduced to tears on several occasions because she was just fodder for this chief. We were only wearing overalls for the first 2 weeks because some of them couldn't stand the 2 weeks and left. So, but after 2 weeks, if you were still there, you were thought, well, we'll risk giving you a uniform. Well, today's uniforms are beautiful material, but in those days it was coarse serge. Not very good at all. It was pretty rough to your skin, and don't forget there was no things like tights and nylons and things. So we got the uniform, and one of the items in the uniform was women know what ETBs are, elastic top and bottoms, and we had thick navy blue knitted knickers, which went from there to here. And then when I tell you they're thick,
Yes.
you thought, oh, that's a laugh, you know. So you put those away. We also, apart from learning to march, you learn a new language because the floors become decks. Your sweet sweets were still on ration, as you nutty. You didn't go to the toilet anymore, you went to the heads. And when we were allowed to go out into Reading on it, because we were thought was sensible enough, you would go and run ashore. And also you learned to tie a tally band, and that's the stuff that goes round that says which ship you're on. And that's got to be absolutely just right. So that was all interesting, and after a month we were drafted. And because I was going to be a radio mechanic, I was sent to a place called Culcheth near Warrington. Very glamorous place, isn't it, Warrington? So we were sitting in school, went back to class. And I thought when I was at school I would never need algebra again. But here I was doing algebra. We're learning radio circuits and things like that, and it's the days...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't tell you that.
No, that's all right. I wanted to leave it just
That's
a couple of seconds. So
you can see
you might
on
want to
the
point
right,
out.
is the girl still wearing her overall. And the one on the left
Where are
wearing
you,
overalls.
Pauline?
So,
Where are you?
good question.
Middle row towards the centre, just to the right.
Middle road.
Next to the girl with the bandage around her head.
That's the
The
one.
tall girl, yeah.
Did you hit her?
No. Right,
Next one.
yeah.
Let's see.
That's our class. We had a very handsome instructor. And we learnt about things like Wheatstone bridges, all sorts of, and we had exams every week. And what also in the services, I don't know if the army have them, you had captain's rounds every week. And if your bed space wasn't immaculate, oh boy, you paid for it in lots of free time. We used to do cross-country runs, and in our spare time we had a pantomime. Next slide was a pantomime. I think I'm one of the chorus girls on the front, which was a nice relief if you're sort of in school every week and doing exams, weekly exams. It's quite hard work, so that was really needed an excuse to let off steam a bit. And we used to do cross-country running. And there was country round Warrington where you could do a nice cross-country run.
In that day. In those days,
Yes. While I was there, King George VI died. And we went to one of his funeral, not to the actual funeral, but there was a parade in Manchester at the same time as his service, and we were in the front of Manchester Town Hall. It was a miserable day, and you know, if you're on a parade you have to be there hours before the start of the civic service, and you can't leave until hours after the civil service has finished, and it was cold, miserable. The light reliefs also was camp cinema. there's nothing like watching Tom and Jerry. We had whole cartoon evenings, and that was great success. And also, something you can't do today. I lived in Sheffield, and this was Warrington, so it was easy to get home onto the East Lancs Road and thumb a lift. And my friend and I, we used to have our smart uniform and 2 Wrens at the side of the East Lancs Road, put your thumb up, and you were in Manchester before you could say Jack. And it was quite safe. Lorry drivers, there was a courteous bunch of men, and you were quite safe with them. You can't say that today. So, after this training to be a radio mechanic, they thought I was quite safe to be let out into the wider world, and I got drafted to Cold Rose. Next slide. Yeah. And I was sent to 738 Squadron, which is Sea Furies. Brilliant aircraft. It's Bristol Centaurus engine, enormous engine, big bulkhead, fire bulkhead, and a little space for a man to sit at the end. 738 Squadron, we had pilots who'd learnt to fly, but they came to our squadron to learn to use weapons. So they would come, only not much older than we were, learnt to fire air-to-air firing, dive bombing, rocket firing, and then at the end of the session they would go on a carrier and learn to do deck landings. We were on 738 Squadron because in those days women weren't allowed on the 800 squadrons, which were frontline squadrons. They didn't think women were safe on jet planes because it was the era when jets were coming into operation with meteors, attackers, vampires, venoms. So we were on the piston engines because they thought the poor little dears couldn't work in a cockpit without pulling the ejector seat down. So, you see, life has changed. So, Cold Rose is, if you have been past it, it's a cold, windy place, and oh boy, did those woolly knickers come very handy. We were the other side of the airfield, and you used to go to work in a lorry, have to climb into a lorry and be driven to the other side of the airfield, which is quite exciting and promoted good camaraderie with your fellow people on the squadrons. When you had aircraft, they got enough fuel to stay aloft for about, at the most, 2 hours. So there was the problem of what you did. Once you got your aircraft up in the air, you had to service them, sign a 700 to say that you thought the radio system was safe and workable, and off they went. So you were left sculling around for an hour and a half probably with nothing to do until they all landed again. So we used to, the Wrens, some of them, did sewing. And I have a nice cushion at home, which is a tapestry cushion, and it's based on when they did air-to-air firing, they had towed targets. And if you cut round the bullet holes of the targets, it made a good base for doing needlework, tapestry. If somebody, one of the chiefs or the petty officers, caught you sitting in your crew room doing nothing, and there was things like compass swinging to do, out you would go. And compass swinging can be quite, on an exposed airfield, you needed your woolly knickers again. And you literally have to heave aircraft around while they check the compass. And also, some chiefs who didn't like Wrens thought the hangar floor needs cleaning. So you would have to go and clean the hangar floor. So it had its downsides. I think you can show next slide. Yeah, we had pilots, obviously young men, and learning to use weapons. And unfortunately, some of them, there was a dive bombing range at Pridanic on the Lizard, and a couple of them went in to dive to drop their bombs and forgot to pull the stick back and had an unhappy ending. And also, when you sent your squadron on to carriers to learn deck landings, not all of them came back again, because that was before you had angled decks, you had arrestor wires, and some of them went overboard. Let's say if eight aircraft went on board, not 8 came back. But mostly the pilots did survive because they had a good pickup service. One of the highlights of the Cold Rose was the Air Day. And that was super. And that was, they practiced a carrier takeoff. And also they did things like, stupid things like, an Oster would fly and land on a Queen Mary, which the Queen Mary is a big low loader. That was interesting. And they were also testing RATOG, which was a rocket-assisted takeoff. And that was quite interesting to watch as well. Always think about. And also, the next squadron on the next hangar was 736 Squadron. And they had one swordfish. That swordfish had one torpedo, which was experimental, and it would take off about twice a week, fly out over the channel, drop its one torpedo, where some NTBs would be around to pick it up and take it to some scientific place to testing, and the swordfish would come back and for its next trip fire this one torpedo. What happened to the experimental torpedo, I don't know. But it was a little diversion. One young pilot said to me, "You fancy a trip out? I'm going rocket firing today." I thought, why not? So it's the trainer down there. That's the two-seater trainer. So he said, "Right, I'm going rocket. I'll take the two-seater. Come with me." I thought, all right, well, let's do that then. And it's also the time when you were flying with your parachute underneath you. So we went off rocket firing over the Bristol Channel. Fortunately for me, it was only a 30-degree dive, but it was quite exciting. When you pull out of the dive, your stomach is somewhere else. It was exciting seeing the rockets whoosh in front of you. So that was quite a highlight. My friend Edna, who was on 736 Squadron, she lived in London, and if you got chatty with the pilots and you lived in London and they were off on a weekend, they might offer you a lift in a two-seater. So she got friendly with one of their pilots on her squadron, and he said, "I'm going up on leave. Have you got a weekend off? I'll take you up to Lyon-Solent." Well, if you get to Lyon-Solent, it's only a short train ride up to London, and you're home for the weekend. So she had to ask permission, because Chief Wren ruled your life. If Chief Wren said yes, you could do it, you did it. If she said no, you didn't. So she went to say, Chief Wren, please, can I have the weekend off? I'm going up to... No, you can't. So that was her weekend gone. And lucky for her, because that pilot ditched in Lyme Regis Bay and she wouldn't have got to London. He had his Cocker Spaniel with him and both were saved. Now, had she gone with him, he would not have been saved, because the only way he would have got out of that plane, the routine was that they inverted the aircraft, the canopy came off and you fell out of the plane. Well, if you can see by the cockpit, it's very close to the passenger cockpit is very close to the tail fin, and you would have got hit by the tail fin, which meant the pilot would have not had chance to get out as well. So Chief Wren did my friend and the pilot a good turn. Now, the most amazing thing, the next slide. Now, you wouldn't think this would happen to a radio mechanic, but there was you can see, Radio lived in Earl's Court. So I was very lucky, and I was one peak to go, the only one from Calderos who went. And when I got there, the Wrenery was on Chain Walk in Chelsea. Wow! How the London Wrens lived. I think they've flogged it off for millions now. But it was very good. So you wouldn't believe it for a radio mechanic. I was told to demonstrate the trajectory of guns. Now, what I knew about that was next to nothing. But it looked good, didn't it? And the opportunities for a social life in the evening were great, because you were there, you could see, you had your uniform on, and there was various young men who were quite willing to take a Wren out for an evening meal. And it was better than the food we were getting in the Wrenery. So that was quite interesting. It only lasted, I think, 2 weeks. But it was an interesting diversion. Right, well, being in the Navy, you don't stay in one place for long. I got drafted to Lee-on-Solent. And instead of being on a squadron, I was in workshops. And I was working on the VHF bench. My friend was on ZBX, which is an instrument landing system. And there was also IFF, which is identification friend or foe, but I don't know if anybody used that. And it was the days before transistors and that, when you still had valves. And if you know that somebody did a rough landing, all the valves or various valves would go on the set. So it's a case of carting the set in, changing certain valves, taking it back again, and bingo, you were serviceable again. What I didn't tell you at the Calderos, where the radio was in a Sea Fury. It's only a small plane, and underneath the wings, was a panel with 16 pins, and you had to sort of heave your shoulder up and get 16 pins out, and then there was a rack with 2 pins in. You had to get the pins out, and then the rack would swing down, and you could get to the radio. So you can see why the woolly knickers were really welcome, because the wind did not whistle. So it was a case of mainly changing valves on radios and sending the set back. And the next workshop was the sonar buoys, and that was a secret weapon in those days, where you put a microphone down to detect submarine cavitation noise from submarine propellers. And the chief there didn't like Wrens. He was one of the old ones, and he used to be a rear gunner in a swordfish. And in the days when they ran out of ammunition, and they would start chucking things overboard from the cockpit. So he was quite a character. And he made sure that you did your job properly. That's saying it mildly. While I was there, the Duchess of Kent came. She came to open unveil a memorial to Fleet Air Arm pilots who'd died and had no known grave. And because she came, of course you had to have a parade. So if you show the next slide, it's the... Don't ask me where I am on that, but I'm somewhere. But it was quite an occasion. And it's nice to say that, you know, you've been there for when a member of royalty come to visit. Then, after that was the, having been to George VI's funeral, it was the coronation. And I'm sure most of you remember there was a review in the Spithead. So being at Liam Solent, we had a grandstand view. Now, after the review was a Fleet Air Arm fly past. Next slide.
Oh, great.
And there was over 100 aircraft there. Now, would you believe that? But somewhere down the side is my friend Edna and I, crouched, waiting for a pilot to put his thumb up to say that his radio didn't work. What we were supposed to do, I don't know, because you can see with all those engines revving up, it would have been impossible to get to them. So we would crouch there, watch them take off, and we didn't do anything. We couldn't have done anything. But it was quite exciting. So I have been pretty fortunate in, you know, being able to witness these events at close quarters. That's also, I think that one came, I don't know where it came from, but it was, pilots get killed in the war, but you forget that they also die training as well.
Yes.
One of the, show me next one. One of the, you know, if you're in the services, if you can find something to do that gets you out of